I never expected my weekend to turn out like this. When I was left alone with my cousin Liam, I thought it would be a chance to reconnect, talk about old memories, and maybe laugh about how much we've both changed. But an unexpected request he made turned our time together into something I'll never forget. What happened that weekend changed how I saw myself, and him, forever. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to follow our page, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment below. Your support helps us share more captivating and emotional stories like this one. When my parents told me I'd be spending the weekend at my cousin Liam's house, I didn't think much of it. We hadn't seen each other in years, not since our childhood summers, when we'd run around my grandparents' backyard playing hide and seek or jumping into the lake together. Life had a way of pulling us apart. Different schools, different interests, and eventually, different cities. Still, I was curious to see what he was like now. Pulling into Liam's driveway, I felt a wave of nostalgia. His family's house hadn't changed much. The same white shutters, the same swing on the porch. Liam greeted me at the door with a grin, and I was struck by how much he'd grown. At 24, he looked every bit like someone who had his life together, confident, fit, and far more mature than the boy I remembered. "Hey, long time no see," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. His voice had deepened since the last time I heard it, and it caught me off guard. "It's good to see you, man. Feels like forever." "Yeah," I replied, trying to match his easygoing tone. "It's been too long." The first evening was uneventful. We ate dinner with his parents before they left for the weekend, leaving us alone in the house. Afterward, we retreated to the living room, where Liam pulled out an old photo album. Flipping through pages of sun-soaked childhood memories, we laughed at our younger selves, wild-haired and carefree. "I can't believe how much we've changed," Liam said, shaking his head. "Look at you now, college graduate, all grown up. Makes me feel old." I chuckled, unsure of what to say. Liam had always been the outgoing one, the one who never seemed to worry about what other people thought. Sitting across from him now, I felt like that dynamic hadn't changed. He had this air of confidence that I couldn't quite match, even in my best moments. As the night wore on, we talked about everything, our jobs, relationships, and the challenges of adulthood. Liam opened up about how he'd struggled after college, trying to find his footing. "Honestly, there were times I didn't think I'd make it," he admitted, his voice low. "But I guess that's life, right? You just keep pushing." I nodded, impressed by his honesty. There was something about the way he spoke, direct but vulnerable, that made me feel at ease. It was a side of him I hadn't seen before, and it made me wonder what else had changed about him. The next day, the rain kept us indoors. We spent most of the afternoon playing old video games, laughing at how rusty we were. At one point, Liam paused the game and turned to me, his expression serious. "Can I ask you something?" he said, leaning back on the couch. "Sure," I replied, setting the controller down. "What's up?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. "This might sound weird, but do you ever feel like you're not living the life you're supposed to be living?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Like you're stuck in this version of yourself that everyone expects you to be, but deep down, you're someone else, someone different." I wasn't sure how to respond. Liam's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I didn't fully understand. There was a vulnerability in his voice that made my chest tighten, like he was trying to say something more but couldn't find the words. Before I could ask him to elaborate, he stood up abruptly. "Never mind," he said with a forced laugh. "Forget I said anything." But I couldn't forget it. His words stayed with me for the rest of the day, sparking questions I wasn't ready to face. What was he really trying to say? And why did it feel like his question was meant for both of us? That night, Liam's question lingered in my mind, replaying like a broken record. "Do you ever feel like you're not living the life you're supposed to be living?" The words struck a chord I didn't fully understand, but I couldn't ignore how they had made me feel, uneasy, curious, and strangely seen. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of rain tapping against the windows. Liam had gone upstairs to shower, leaving me alone in the dimly lit living room. I scrolled absent-mindedly through my phone, trying to distract myself, but my thoughts kept drifting back to his question. What was he trying to tell me? And why did it feel like there was something left unsaid? When Liam came back downstairs, his hair damp and messy, he looked more relaxed than he had earlier. He dropped onto the couch next to me, his shoulders sinking into the cushions. "Feel better?" I asked, setting my phone aside. "Yeah," he said with a small smile. "Nothing like a hot shower to clear your head." For a moment we sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes with knowing someone for years. Then, as if breaking the stillness was too much to resist, Liam spoke again. "I've been meaning to ask you," he said, his tone casual but his eyes serious. "How's your love life these days? Anyone special?" The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before answering. "Not really," I admitted. "I've been so busy with work and, well, you know how it is." Liam chuckled softly. "Yeah, I get it. But it's important to make time for yourself, you know? To figure out what makes you happy." There was that word again. Happy. It seemed to carry so much weight when Liam said it, like it wasn't just about relationships or work, but something deeper, something personal. "What about you?" I asked, shifting the focus away from myself. "Anyone in your life?" Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Not exactly," he said after a pause. "I've been figuring some things out. About myself, about what I want. It's been a process." I could tell he was choosing his words carefully, as if he didn't want to reveal too much. But even in his hesitation, there was a vulnerability that made me want to press further. "Figuring things out," I repeated. "Like what?" He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Like who I am," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "And who I want to be." His words sent a ripple through me, stirring feelings I didn't fully understand. There was something about the way he said it, quiet but resolute, that made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to dive into something I couldn't see. Before I could respond, Liam looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. "Have you ever felt like that?" he asked. "Like you're trying to figure out where you fit in, but nothing feels right?" I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. "Yeah," I said eventually. "I think everyone feels that way at some point." Liam gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "It's just hard, you know? Feeling like you can't be honest, like no one would understand." The room felt heavier with each word, the air thick with unspoken truths. I wanted to tell him he wasn't alone, that I understood more than he realized, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached out, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You can talk to me," I said softly. "You know that, right?" Liam looked at me, his eyes shining with something I couldn't quite name. Gratitude? Fear? Maybe both. He gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks," he said. "That means a lot." The conversation ended there, but the tension between us didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger, filling the spaces between words and silences. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. Liam's words had cracked open something inside me, something I wasn't ready to confront. And I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if I did? The next morning, the house was quiet when I woke up. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting soft patterns on the walls. I found Liam in the kitchen, frying eggs and humming a tune I didn't recognize. He looked over his shoulder when I walked in, a smile breaking across his face. "Morning," he said, his voice light. "Coffee's ready if you want some." "Thanks," I said, pouring myself a cup and leaning against the counter. Watching him move around the kitchen so effortlessly felt oddly comforting, like this was something we'd done 100 times before, even though we hadn't. As we sat down to eat, the conversation was casual at first. Jokes about how bad we were at cooking as kids, memories of holidays spent together. But beneath the surface, I could feel it again, the tension, the unspoken weight of everything he had said the night before. "So," I said, testing the waters, "about what you mentioned yesterday, figuring things out. Do you want to talk about it?" Liam hesitated, his fork pausing mid-air. He set it down and leaned back in his chair, his eyes meeting mine. For a moment, I thought he might brush it off, but then he let out a soft sigh. "It's complicated," he said. "I've been carrying it around for a while, trying to make sense of it all." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Sometimes talking helps," I offered. "You don't have to have it all figured out." Liam's lips curved into a small, bittersweet smile. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you're doing what's expected of you instead of what feels right?" The question hung in the air, and I felt a pang of recognition. I didn't know where he was going with this, but I couldn't deny the truth in his words. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think I know what you mean." His gaze softened, and for a moment the room felt smaller, like it was just the two of us in the world. Then he broke eye contact, looking down at his plate as if searching for the right words. "I've been afraid to say it out loud," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I think I'm finally ready." My heart pounded in my chest, and I wasn't sure why. There was something vulnerable, almost raw, in the way he spoke, and it felt like whatever he was about to say would change everything. Before he could continue, the sound of the doorbell cut through the room. Liam flinched, his shoulders tensing, and I felt the moment slip away. He stood up quickly, muttering something about checking who it was, and disappeared down the hall. I sat there, my mind racing. What had he been about to say? And why did it feel like the interruption wasn't just bad timing but something more? Like he was looking for an excuse not to finish? When Liam returned, he seemed quieter, more guarded. The lightness from earlier was gone, replaced by an air of uncertainty. I wanted to ask him what was on his mind, but I didn't want to push too hard. The rest of the day passed in a blur. We went for a walk around the neighborhood, talked about work and family, and even played another round of video games, but the tension lingered. It was like there was a wall between us now, one I couldn't see but could feel with every interaction. That evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Liam shifted closer to me. The movement was subtle, but it sent a jolt through me. His shoulder brushed against mine, and I froze, unsure of what to do. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly, not looking at me. I turned to him, my heart pounding. "Me too." Our eyes met, and for a moment everything else faded away. There was something in his gaze, an intensity, a vulnerability, that made it impossible to look away. It felt like he was on the verge of saying something, of crossing a line neither of us fully understood yet. But before I could speak, he stood up abruptly, breaking the moment. "I think I'm gonna head to bed," he said, his voice uneven. "Good night." "Good night," I replied, watching him disappear up the stairs. As I sat there alone, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. What had just happened, and why did it feel like we were standing on the edge of something neither of us was ready to face? The following day, the tension between Liam and me was undeniable. Every glance, every shared silence seemed to hold more weight than it should have. I wanted to talk to him, to ask what was on his mind, but every time I opened my mouth, the words seemed to evaporate. By mid-afternoon, Liam suggested we go for a drive. "There's this spot I want to show you," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It's peaceful. Good for thinking." Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. The drive was quiet at first, the hum of the car filling the void. Liam tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, his expression unreadable. I stared out the window, my thoughts racing with questions I couldn't bring myself to ask. After about 20 minutes, we pulled into a small, secluded park. A gravel path led to a clearing overlooking a serene lake, the water shimmering under the afternoon sun. Liam grabbed a blanket from the trunk and spread it out near the shore. "This was my favorite spot growing up," he said as we sat down. "I used to come here when I needed to clear my head." "It's beautiful," I admitted, the calmness of the lake settling over me. For a while, we just sat there, the sounds of the water and distant birds filling the silence. Then, out of nowhere, Liam spoke. "Have you ever felt like you wanted to say something but couldn't? Like, no matter how much you wanted to, the words just wouldn't come out?" His question caught me off guard, but I nodded. "Yeah, I felt that. Sometimes it's easier to keep things inside." Liam turned to me, his gaze intense. "But what if keeping it inside is what's tearing you apart?" I didn't know what to say. The vulnerability in his voice was so raw, so open that it left me speechless. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to hold back, that I was here for him. But before I could, he continued. "There's something I've been trying to tell you," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Something I've been scared to admit, even to myself." My heart pounded as I watched him struggle with his words. "You can tell me," I said softly. "Whatever it is, it's okay." He took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists on his lap. I think I've been lying to myself about who I am. And being around you, it's made me realize things I've been trying to ignore." The air between us seemed to crackle with energy, every word he said pulling me closer to some invisible edge. I could feel my pulse racing, my mind scrambling to process what he was saying. "What things?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Liam looked at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't quite name. Fear, hope, longing. "Things about how I feel. About you." The words hit me like a tidal wave, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but all I could focus on was the look in his eyes, so open and raw that it left me no room to doubt his sincerity. "I know this is probably the last thing you expected," he said, his voice breaking. "And I get it if you don't feel the same way, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore." The vulnerability in his voice shattered any walls I had left. "Liam," I said, my voice trembling, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied quickly. "I just needed you to know." Silence fell between us, heavy and charged. I searched for the right words, something to convey the storm of emotions swirling inside me, but before I could speak, a sharp crack of thunder echoed across the lake. The sky, which had been clear just moments ago, was now dark with storm clouds. "We should get back to the car," Liam said, his voice tight. He stood up, grabbing the blanket and folding it with shaky hands. I followed him in silence, my thoughts a whirlwind. The drive home was quiet, both of us lost in our own minds. I kept replaying his words, the look in his eyes, the way his voice had trembled. I wanted to reach out, to tell him I understood, but something held me back, a mix of fear and confusion I wasn't ready to confront. When we got back to the house, Liam disappeared into his room without a word, leaving me alone in the living room. I sat there for hours, staring at the blank TV screen, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I had always thought of Liam as my cousin, my friend, someone who had been a part of my life for as long as I could remember. But now, everything felt different. His words had opened a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through. And yet, a part of me couldn't ignore the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I felt the same way. The next morning, the house felt heavier than usual. Liam's door remained shut, and I found myself lingering in the kitchen, unsure whether to knock or give him space. My mind was still reeling from what he'd confessed by the lake, and I wasn't sure how to process it. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep avoiding him. I took a deep breath, walked down the hall, and tapped lightly on his door. "Liam, can we talk?" For a moment there was no response, and I thought he might ignore me. But then the door creaked open, and Liam stood there, looking like he hadn't slept. His hair was messy, his eyes tired, and the vulnerability from the day before was still etched across his face. "Hey," he said quietly, stepping aside to let me in. His room was simple and familiar, the same posters from our childhood still tacked to the walls. I sat on the edge of his bed, my hands fidgeting in my lap. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, waiting for me to speak. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," I began, my voice shaky. "And I don't know how to put this into words, but I think I need to be honest with you." Liam's expression softened, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready for," he said gently. "No, I do," I insisted, meeting his gaze. "Because what you said, about figuring things out, about how you feel, it made me realize I've been avoiding my own feelings too." His eyes widened slightly, and I could see the flicker of hope he was trying to suppress. "What do you mean?" I mean... I took a deep breath, forcing myself to continue. "I've always thought of you as my cousin, my friend, someone I could count on. But after this weekend, I feel like there's more to it than that, and I don't know what to do with that." The room fell silent, the air between us thick with tension. Liam took a cautious step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. I needed to tell you how I feel because it was eating me alive." I nodded, my throat tight. "I know, and I'm glad you told me. It's just, this is new for me. I don't know what this means." Liam's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he gave me a small, tentative smile. "It doesn't have to mean anything right now. We can take it one step at a time." His words were a relief, but they also left me feeling exposed. I wasn't used to being vulnerable, to letting someone see the parts of me I kept hidden. But with Liam, it felt different. Like maybe it was okay to let my guard down. Before I could respond, there was a loud crash from outside, followed by the sound of shattering glass. We both jumped, rushing to the window to see what had happened. Across the street, a car had skidded into a tree, its front end crumpled and smoke rising from the hood. Without hesitation, Liam grabbed his phone and bolted out the door, calling 911 as he ran. I followed close behind, adrenaline pumping through my veins. When we reached the scene, a woman was sitting in the driver's seat, dazed but conscious. Liam crouched beside the car, speaking to her calmly and reassuringly while we waited for help to arrive. I watched him in awe, his natural confidence and compassion shining through even in the chaos. By the time the paramedics arrived, Liam had helped the woman out of the car and made sure she was stable. As the ambulance pulled away, he turned to me, his face a mix of relief and exhaustion. "That was intense," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah," I agreed, my heart still racing. "But you handled it like a pro." He shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I just did what anyone would do." As we walked back to the house, I couldn't help but feel like the incident had shifted something between us. It was a reminder of who Liam was at his core, someone who cared deeply, someone I admired more than I realized. When we got back inside, the tension from earlier felt lighter, replaced by a sense of understanding. Liam looked at me, his expression open and hopeful. "Thanks for being there," he said softly. "It means a lot." I nodded, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't fully name. Of course, I wouldn't have been anywhere else. And for the first time all weekend, I felt like maybe I was exactly where I was meant to be. Later that evening, Liam and I sat on the porch, the night air cool against our skin. Neither of us spoke for a while, content to sit in the quiet. Eventually, Liam broke the silence. "I'm glad you stayed this weekend," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with meaning. I glanced at him, my heart racing. "Me too." It wasn't a grand declaration or a sudden resolution, but in that moment, it felt like enough. We didn't have all the answers, but we had something better, the courage to take things one step at a time. If this story resonated with you, let us know in the comments. How would you navigate a situation like this? Don't forget to follow our page, subscribe, and like this video to stay connected to more heartfelt stories like this one. Thank you for watching.